So this is it, the brand new Apple iPad mini, with the long-awaited redesign that we've always been wanting to see on the iPad mini, matching this up a little bit more with the iPad Air and the iPad Pro. Apple did a lot to this. They changed the aesthetics with the boxier edges, as you can see. They made the screen bigger and the body smaller. They gave you better specs on the inside, and they did a lot of other things we'll talk about throughout this video. But if you saw Apple's most recent event, where they announced the iPhone 13, the iPad mini, the iPad 9th gen, all that stuff, or even if you just read about it, you might have noticed what people talked about the most was the iPad mini. People seem to be really excited about this new device, but why is that? Do that many people actually use iPad minis, and what do they use them for? Well, in this video, we're not only going to talk about what is different about this iPad and how the new uses might apply to you, but also what kind of uses you would even have for a small tablet in general. Because honestly, tablets have kind of been looking around for their place in the world for a while. When they first came out, everyone kind of just said, it's just a big iPhone, and to some extent, it kind of is, but it's more than that. In the past on this channel, I've compared tablets to SUVs. They're not quite as small and efficient as a phone, or as mobile as a phone, but they're also not quite as capable of the heavy powerlifting like a laptop. But sometimes an SUV is exactly what you need, and so in this situation, it's a compact SUV. Now, we'll get back to that analogy later on in this video, but I want to start off with the physical design here, because that's obviously one of the biggest things that Apple changed. They made this look much more futuristic, brought it up to the iPad Air and iPad Pro aesthetic, like I said, but let's take a look at this. So you can see that on the front, we have a bigger, better display. This is an 8.3-inch display, which is almost a half-inch larger than the previous iPad mini, while shrinking the bezels all the way around this. On the top, when you hold it vertically, you can see that we have our selfie camera there. I'll talk more about that later in the video, but the bezels are very symmetrical all the way around the entire screen. Honestly, I think they're a perfect size. I wouldn't want them any larger or smaller because it gives you a nice space to hold this without having any accidental touches, and it's still easy to ignore that bezel and not even really see it when you're watching movies or using this for anything like that. Along the edges, of course, we do have a more boxy design here. We use speakers on the top and the bottom, or in landscape mode, that'd be on the left and right side. And I will get into a test with that, but I mean, spoiler, the speakers do a really fantastic job for such a small device. And as a side note, if you're new to this channel and you like this style of video, a sub to the channel would be great. And on the top corner, we have a power button, which doubles as a fingerprint sensor. And on that same edge, we have the volume controls, which have been moved there because now you have a second generation Apple Pencil support, which is great. I love that you're able to use this. It is far superior, in my opinion, to the first generation. And now it charges and sticks directly to the edge of your iPad. So I really like how this is located. I feel like I'm not gonna lose it, and especially if you get a case for your iPad, you really don't have to worry about this if you throw it in a backpack. I love having that on there. Of course, it is almost the full length of the iPad. You can see just how mini this really is. But I mean, when you take the pencil away, it's almost hard to tell that it is a mini iPad because it does seem to be pretty proportional. Flipping over to the back, you'll see that we have a flash, a microphone, and a camera that does actually protrude a little bit. So anybody who is annoyed by camera wobble, you might be a little bit bothered and you might want a case on this device, for example, because, you know, for the first time we have a camera bump on the iPad mini. Looking on the bottom, where I said that we had the speaker, we also have a USB Type-C port, which I'm more than happy to see, as again, we're seeing with the iPad Air and the iPad Pro, however, not with the regular iPad. Moving to USB-C, I think, is a really smart move here. The display itself is also far better than the previous model, giving you better contrast, better color, darker blacks, and of course, it is just a larger display in general. And I don't want to get into specs too much in this video, but a few key highlights. The first one is that the base model for this has 64 gigabytes of storage, which is great. And on top of that, this is also running the brand new A15 Bionic, the same one we're seeing on the iPhone 13 Pro, the most powerful one that Apple really has in small devices like this. And so you're gonna get a great fast experience, even though this is a very tiny device. As far as battery life goes, being that it's a small device, much like the iPhone mini, which is running a powerful processor in a tiny body, it's not the most impressive battery life out there. If you're really pushing it a lot, you might not get as long of a battery life as the larger devices like the iPad Air or Pro, of course. But all things considered, it is a pretty efficient device, and I found that I'm getting reasonable battery out of this, more than I would really need for a single day. And the last spec I want to point out is that there is a 5G version of this available as well. Okay, so I mentioned I'd get back to the front-facing camera. There's two things I really want to talk about here. The first one, as I mentioned with my previous iPad 9th generation video, is I think by now it would make more sense to have the camera, the front-facing camera, on the long edge of the display as opposed to on the short edge, because in most situations I find myself getting in video calls in a landscape mode, which means that for this it's going to be all the way down on the edge, and well, you'll see that when I place the iPad directly in front of me and I look directly at the middle of the screen, it looks like I'm looking way off to the side. So that's a little bit of a drawback, but the thing about the iPad mini being such a small device is that it's not nearly as drastic as we saw with the larger iPad where the camera's even farther over. So if I'm a little bit farther away from this device, it's really not even that noticeable that I'm looking at the middle and not over at the camera. So not a huge drawback, but nonetheless, I think the top right there is really where it should belong. The rear camera is obviously not on the same caliber as the iPhones or as the iPad Pro, so you don't really have the same AR capabilities with this, but all things considered, it's not really meant to be taking a lot of photos and portraits and things like that, as much as it is to just scan documents and do the basics like that. So for those purposes, it's definitely more than enough. Taking pictures and drawing on them, if you're trying to do some basic architecture or landscape design, I mean, it's easily going to do what you need it to. I just wouldn't expect to be posting on social media with the best photo of your life from the iPad mini. I think that kind of goes without saying though, right? And the other thing I mentioned earlier was the speakers, which having one on either side, or the top and bottom, depending on how you look at it, I think does a fantastic job of giving you a more stereo sound when you're watching movies, any type of media, playing music, or if you're just on a video call in general. Now, they did remove the headphone jack on here, so it's either speakers or Bluetooth for most situations, but the speakers, I think, do a fantastic job. Let's get into a demonstration right now so you can see just how capable they really are. Just 10 miles south of Yellowstone is Grand Teton National Park. And although the two parks are side by side, they honestly couldn't be more different. With its unique alpine lakes, lush forests, and iconic mountain peaks. So I think by now you have a pretty good understanding of the iPad mini, but that still doesn't answer the question of why? Why did Apple make this, and what is it really useful for? And in order to better understand that, I first want to talk about the accessories, because these are some of the things that really set this apart from other devices out there. They really set it apart from Fire tablets and folding phones, and even smaller Android tablets. And so, talking about these accessories, the first one I want to mention is the second generation Apple Pencil, with a very low latency, a really natural feel to it, and of course the ability to charge on the side of your iPad. I think this is really a must-have if you get the iPad mini. It's great for signing documents, handwriting notes, or just because it's kind of awkward to type on this device, just handwriting things and having them convert to text as opposed to using the keyboard. And going along with that idea of being harder to type on the display, I think it's also a good idea to get a smart folio. Although this is a very small device, having a keyboard can really make it feel like a much larger device. On top of that, the smart folio allows it to kind of prop upright and feel more like a laptop and less like a phone. And of course, being that this is so powerful, it could really be acting like a phone or like a laptop. So those are two things that really make this a very powerful device. And the third thing I want to mention is less of a peripheral device and more of making this the peripheral device, and this is Sidecar. So if you're running any new Mac OS, you're able to use Sidecar, and in the future, you will also have universal control, which is nice, which essentially means that this can act as a second monitor for your laptop or your iMac, your MacBook, whatever it might be. It's really nice that you're able to use this with any new Mac OS. So for example, if you're traveling and you want a second display, if you're in a coffee shop, you have your MacBook and you want to have a second display, an iPad mini might be a great way to do that, and on top of that, you do still have touch controls on here, making it even more functional than just having a laptop. And that's the first of many examples for where an iPad mini is useful, which I think is interesting because unlike a lot of other devices which have obvious use cases, the iPad mini has so many different and completely unrelated use cases that it really just needs to be as versatile as possible. Apple, for example, kept mentioning how pilots love to use iPad minis, and so having a small device that now has a bigger display and faster processor and more storage can only be better for pilots. On top of that, there are plenty of other work situations where people don't want a tiny phone, but they don't want a big laptop. So if you're in the field and you have to take notes about whatever kind of job you're doing, a tiny iPad that fits in your pocket could also be really beneficial. And then on the opposite side, away from commercial use, personal use, I mean, I know my mom really wants to use an iPad mini. She's had one for a while because it's great for traveling, it fits in a purse, it's easy to just kind of charge, and it's not a big device you always have to worry about. And so I can see a lot of people really liking this for traveling, really liking it as a peripheral device to go next to their laptop when they're in a coffee shop, or in a more commercial environment, of course, like I said, using this to take notes in a meeting or using this for all types of different things. And I think that's really what Apple was going for here, to make a device that is as versatile as possible. This could work pretty similar to how your phone works, but just be a little bit bigger. Or this could work more like a small laptop. And I think for those purposes, it's kind of hard to say exactly why you'd be getting an iPad mini, but that kind of ties in with why you'd buy a compact SUV. Maybe you have a small family. Maybe you go off-roading in the snow. Maybe you want something that is a little bit bigger for your groceries than a sedan, but smaller than a truck. And that's why I think that analogy of a compact SUV makes perfect sense for the iPad mini. There are plenty of uses, it's really versatile, and it does a little bit of everything. But you can leave a comment below. Let me know what you think about the iPad mini. Is this something you'll actually be getting? And do you think this is going to have widespread adoption? Or do you think it's missing something? I want to hear from you guys in the comments below. As always, if you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing. I'm Mike O'Brien. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.